What happens when the daughter of a billionaire abandons her triplets at a dump site, only for them to be found by a poor, childless woman with nothing to give but love? 3 lives almost thrown away. 1 woman who chose love over logic, and a fate that would turn pain into purpose. This is not just a story of survival. It's a testament to the kind of motherhood that doesn't come from blood, but from sacrifice. The music pulsed like a heartbeat, deep and loud, shaking the floors of Club Vortex, the most exclusive nightclub in Lagos. Bodies swayed under strobe lights. Laughter mingled with the clinking of expensive glasses, and perfume floated in the thick, humid air. At the center of it all, like a queen surrounded by her court, was Annabelle Wilson. She leaned back on a velvet booth seat, a half-finished cocktail in one hand, her long manicured nails glittering under the club lights. Her dark curls cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face sculpted by privilege and untouched by consequence. Her laughter was loud, carefree, tinged with the kind of arrogance that came from knowing the world would always bend to her whims. "Another round, please," she called to the waiter without looking. It wasn't a request, it was a royal decree. The waiter scurried away. Around her were a dozen other young adults, some sons and daughters of politicians, others celebrities, and a few hangers on hoping her wealth would spill in their direction. She didn't care. Tonight was her 3rd party in 4 days, and she was nowhere near tired. The nights were her escape, and the flashing lights gave her the illusion of freedom. What was the point of being young and rich if you couldn't set the city on fire? Across the table, one of her friends leaned in. "Amma, you're glowing tonight. Who did your makeup?" Annabelle rolled her eyes playfully. "Babe, I wake up glowing. But yes, Chica from Bloom's." They all laughed, half in admiration, half in envy. She knew it, and she soaked it up. Yet, beneath the shimmer of highlighter and false lashes, Annabelle felt something gnawing at her, a dull emptiness she couldn't name. Every night she partied harder, drank more, flirted endlessly. But every morning she woke up in her penthouse feeling like a stranger in her own life. Her father, Chief Damien Wilson, was one of the wealthiest oil magnates in West Africa. Her mother, Lillian, had once been a beauty queen and now paraded around as a society matron, more concerned with charity gala appearances than actual parenting. They provided everything: private tutors, security, vacations to Dubai and Monaco, but never presents, never love. Annabelle was a prized possession, not a daughter. A young man slid into the seat beside her, whispering something in her ear that made her giggle. She didn't even know his name. Didn't care to. Tonight, she just wanted to forget. She took another sip of her drink and let him put his arm around her. The drinks kept flowing. The DJ switched to a faster beat, and the table erupted into cheers. Annabelle stood, danced on the couch, arms in the air like she was invincible. But in her mind, there was a flicker, a shadow. A thought that maybe, just maybe, she was spinning out of control. She shook it off and leaned in to kiss the stranger beside her. Outside, the city buzzed with traffic and chaos, oblivious to the silent storm growing inside the billionaire's daughter. The pregnancy test clattered against the marble sink as Annabelle backed away from it like it had grown fangs. "No, no, no, no," she whispered, as if her denial could erase the 2 pink lines staring back at her. Her perfectly sculpted nails trembled as she picked up the plastic stick again and stared at it, willing it to change. But it didn't. Reality hit her like a slap. She staggered back into the vanity chair in her bathroom, heart thudding violently, palms slick with sweat. The expensive scented candles around her flickered against the glossy tiles, casting long shadows on the walls, as if the whole room now conspired to close in on her. Pregnant. She didn't know who the father was. It could have been one of 3 guys, maybe 4. The weeks blurred together in a haze of vodka, Afrobeats, and strangers. She had stopped keeping track of names long ago. What did it matter when nothing ever had consequences? Until now. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, flawless skin, perfect lashes, rich girl beauty, but all she saw was panic. The next morning, she didn't show up for brunch at the Lagos Yacht Club. She stayed curled in bed with her phone on Do Not Disturb, scrolling through forums and articles. Can you hide a pregnancy for 9 months? How to travel out of state while pregnant, rich girls who disappeared while pregnant. She didn't even know what she was looking for. Hope, maybe, or a loophole in reality. Then an idea hit her. That evening, dressed in a silk robe, Annabelle walked into the living room where her parents were hosting a meeting with some oil executives. She interrupted, unapologetically, and they dismissed the men within minutes. Her father looked up at her from his whiskey glass, slightly annoyed. What is it this time? Annabelle took a deep breath and began to spin her tale. I've been thinking, she started, affecting a soft, serious tone. I'm wasting my potential. Partying, spending your money. I need to get serious. Both parents blinked. Her mother set her wine glass down slowly, as if trying to process what planet her daughter was suddenly speaking from. I want to go to Port Harcourt, she continued. There's a fashion program there. 1 year. It's intensive. Real-world experience. I think it's time I built something of my own. Her father narrowed his eyes, suspicious. You? Fashion program? Since when? She placed a perfectly timed pout on her lips. Daddy, I know I've disappointed you, but I want to change. Please let me. Her mother perked up, already imagining the PR angle. It could be good for your image, she murmured to her husband. The billionaire's daughter turned designer. It'll get the blogs talking in a positive way. Her father sighed heavily. Fine, but you'll have a driver and a security detail. No, Annabelle cut in quickly. I want to be normal. No staff. Just me. I'll rent a flat near the institute. It's the only way I'll grow. More silence. Then finally, we'll send you some allowance monthly, her father said. Thanks, Daddy, she said, hugging him tightly, too tightly. Her eyes were wide, filled with lies and desperation masked as determination. 3 weeks later, Annabelle stood alone at the gate of a modest compound in a small town just outside Port Harcourt. Not the high-rise suite her parents thought they had paid for. She had used only part of the money to secure a tiny, 2-room bungalow in a quiet area where no one knew her name. The rest of the money was hidden, to last her the long, uncertain months ahead. Her belongings arrived in a simple truck, no security escort, no chauffeur in sight. She watched from the dusty porch as the neighbors peered curiously at the city girl with suitcases. Inside the house, there was no luxury. The bed creaked. The fan barely worked. The water pressure was unreliable. But Annabelle didn't care. She didn't want comfort. She wanted secrecy. She locked the door, drew the blinds, and leaned against the wall. She was completely alone. And for the first time in her life, that terrified her. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic, and rusted ceiling fans turned lazily overhead, doing little to chase away the heavy humidity. Annabelle sat stiffly in the waiting room, her oversized hoodie pulled low over her face despite the sweltering heat. She wore dark sunglasses and a cheap wig from the local market, her version of a disguise. She had chosen this clinic carefully, far from the main roads, no digital check-ins, no eyes familiar with glossy magazine features or TV gala reruns where her face had once appeared. Here, she was no longer Annabelle Wilson, daughter of the billionaire. She was just Annabelle, a nervous young woman sitting alone with trembling fingers clutching a plastic medical file. The nurse called her name, and she followed silently, heart pounding. The walls of the consultation room were pale green, chipped at the corners, and smelled of bleach. The doctor, a tired-looking man with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair, glanced at her file, then at her. You're 22 weeks in, he said after a quick ultrasound. Annabelle swallowed hard. I want to know if it's a boy or a girl. The doctor squinted at the screen, pressing the probe gently against her abdomen. Then he frowned, adjusted the wand, and stared again. Her heart began to race. What? She asked, voice cracking. Is something wrong? He looked at her and smiled, not with pity but with something softer. Not wrong. Just surprising. He turned the screen slightly toward her. You're having triplets. Annabelle blinked. I'm what? Triplets, he repeated. 3 babies. All appear healthy. You're carrying 3 boys. The room spun. She didn't hear the rest of what he said. Words like shared placenta, monitoring, high risk. They floated past her ears like wind. She was still stuck on 3. Her stomach churned violently, and she barely made it to the rusted sink in the corner before vomiting up the dry bread she had forced herself to eat that morning. That night, she lay on the thin mattress in her rented flat, curled into herself like a frightened child. The fan buzzed overhead, but it couldn't drown out the storm in her chest. Triplets. 3 lives. 3 babies. All growing inside her. She stared at the cracked ceiling above, hot tears streaming down the sides of her face into her hair. The weight of what she had done, what she had become, crashed down on her. "I can't do this," she whispered into the dark. "I can't." The following days were a blur. She walked slowly, afraid of every bump on the road. She stopped answering calls from her parents. Her body grew heavy, her ankles began to swell, and strangers on the street started offering her seats or greeting her with, "Ah, it must be twins." She no longer fit into any of the clothes she brought. Her food cravings grew stranger by the week. Her back ached. Her sleep disappeared. Her savings, despite all her planning, dwindled alarmingly fast. And the loneliness, it became suffocating. She talked to no one. She didn't attend any class because, in truth, there was no fashion school. The lie had become a wall she couldn't climb down from. She avoided going out except to the local market, where she bought the cheapest food she could find. Each night, she came back to her flat, locked the door, and sat in the dim light, staring at her swollen belly. Sometimes she pressed her palm against her stomach and felt the ripples beneath her skin, tiny movements, fluttering like moths. The first time she felt a kick, she screamed and cried at once. She didn't know how to love what was growing inside her. She didn't know how to survive it. The months crept on, and with each passing week, Annabelle felt more like a prisoner in her own body. Her skin stretched painfully. Her face swelled. Her once glowing beauty dulled. Mirrors became enemies. Her soul dimmed. There were nights she stood barefoot in her kitchen, holding a kitchen knife with trembling fingers, thinking things she didn't want to think. Nights she stared at her belly and whispered, "I wish I had gotten rid of you when I had the chance." But the next morning always came, and the weight in her belly always remained. Then, one humid evening, her water broke. The pain came like a hurricane. She stumbled out of her house screaming for help. Neighbors who barely knew her came running. A taxi was found. A hospital was called. She didn't know the name of the doctor who received her. She didn't care. She screamed, cursed, bit down on cloth. Hours later, when the cries of 3 newborn boys echoed in the sterile hospital ward, Annabelle turned her face away from them. She refused to hold them, refused to feed them. When the nurse laid the first boy on her chest, she barely flinched. Her heart felt like a stone. "I don't want to see them," she said, her voice hoarse. "Take them away." The nurse paused. "They need their mother." Annabelle turned her head toward the window and closed her eyes. "I'm not their mother." The wind was unusually sharp that morning, one of those rare pre-dawn chills that slice through the dense humidity of the town like broken glass. A gray fog settled low over the dusty streets, coiling through gutters and alleyways like a restless spirit. Crickets had gone quiet, and even the dogs weren't barking. The world, for just a moment, seemed to be holding its breath. Annabelle stood at the edge of a dirt path that led to the town's garbage dump site, a narrow stretch of forgotten land where rusted cans, rotting food, and the leftovers of other people's lives were discarded. Her eyes were hollow, her cheeks gaunt, and her once glamorous figure was now veiled in a faded wrapper and a shapeless sweater that swallowed her whole. In her trembling arms was a woven basket lined with an old bedsheet. Inside were the 3 newborns, each barely a week old, wrapped in mismatched cloth, their tiny chests rising and falling with breath too innocent for the world they had been brought into. She stood there for a long while, her bare feet planted in damp earth, shivering, not from cold, but from the weight of it all. Her eyes flicked between the path behind her and the babies in the basket. The morning light had not yet arrived. Only the dim blue wash of twilight cast a ghostly hue on her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking like brittle glass. She bent down slowly, placed the basket beside a worn tire, and stared at them, each of their faces soft and serene, unaware of abandonment. One of them stirred and whimpered. The sound cut through her like a blade. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She turned and walked away quickly, resisting the overwhelming urge to turn around, to scoop them up, to scream and fall to her knees. She kept walking, and just like that, Annabelle disappeared into the fog, leaving behind the only 3 people who would ever share her blood. At precisely 5:32 a.m., Mama Ebel made her way down that same path, her feet wrapped in torn slippers and a rough sack slung across her shoulders. Her face was weathered, the lines etched into her skin from years of survival, not age. Her headscarf was neatly tied, her hands calloused, and her spirit, though battered, still intact. She didn't mind the silence of dawn. In fact, she preferred it. She had no husband to speak of, no children to wake her with playful cries. Her mornings were spent collecting discarded plastics and aluminum from the dump site. She would later sell them to the recycling men for a few naira, just enough for Gary and palm oil. But this morning was different. She paused as she reached the bend in the path. A faint, high-pitched sound stopped her in her tracks. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't the wind. It was crying. She took a cautious step forward. Then another. And then she saw it. A basket. Movement. And the unmistakable sound of 3 tiny infants wailing into the empty sky. Mama Ebel gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Her sack fell to the ground. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside the basket. Her hands hovered as if afraid to touch the babies, as if doing so might wake her from a strange dream. "Jesus," she whispered. "Who would do this? Who?" She scanned the area, hoping, no, praying, that someone would come running, claiming them. That it was all a mistake. But the road was empty. The silence returned. Only the babies spoke now, their cries louder, hungry, cold. She reached down, scooping up the first child gently. His skin was warm, cheeks flushed from weeping. She pulled him close to her chest, humming something broken and sweet. Then she lifted the others, balancing all 3 in her arms like a sacred burden. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. She stood slowly, unsteadily, and whispered to the wind, "I don't know who you are or what kind of pain made you do this, but I swear on my mother's grave, these children will not die here." She turned back toward the town, 3 babies pressed to her chest, and walked the long road home. Her room was barely 10 square meters, with a single mattress on the floor and a kerosene stove in the corner. But it became a sanctuary. She fed them water mixed with glucose, then pap, then begged a neighbor for old baby clothes. She sold more than she collected just to buy powdered milk. She sang to them, rocked them, named them. Kelvin, Elijah, Ken. Thank God. Great is God. God's will. 3 names. 3 blessings. 3 chances at the family she thought she'd never have. And as the sun finally rose above the rooftops and lit her modest room with soft gold, Mama Ebel looked at the sleeping boys and whispered to herself, "You were not thrown away. You were delivered to me." The first few weeks were brutal. Mama Ebel hadn't slept properly since the morning she found the babies. Her room, which had always been quiet, now echoed with midnight cries and restless whimpers. Her bones ached from the constant lifting, rocking, and carrying. Her clothes were often stained with spit-up or sour milk. There were times she sat on the edge of her thin mattress, head in her hands, thinking, "How did I get here?" But each time one of the boys reached up with a tiny fist, or calmed at the sound of her voice, she would remember. She didn't choose them, but she received them, and she would never give them back. Ebel adjusted her entire world for the triplets. Her days became a carefully choreographed dance of feeding, bathing, carrying, and stretching every naira she had. The boys didn't have proper diapers. She tore up old wrappers and folded them into makeshift ones. She didn't have a crib or baby chairs. She placed them in worn baskets lined with old towels and rearranged her furniture so she could keep her eyes on all 3. Her neighbors whispered, "Who even gave her those children? Why won't she report it? She's not even married. She can't feed herself. Now she has mouths to feed?" But Ebel didn't answer them. Not once. She walked past the judgment like it was dust on her shoulder. She didn't owe them explanations. These boys were hers now. God had placed them in her hands, and she would not fail him. The gossip was the least of her problems anyway. One day, when the boys were around 4 months old, Ebel found herself with only 500 Nigerian nairas left to her name. It was meant to last 2 days. She needed Gary, some milk, and kerosene. She stood at the junction with the twins strapped across her chest and back, and one in her arms, heart pounding with silent desperation. She entered a small kiosk and picked a tin of baby cereal, then placed it back. Too expensive. She picked a smaller sachet of milk. Still too much. Her throat tightened. For the first time since they came into her life, a terrifying thought crept in. What if I can't do this anymore? What if I have to let them go? Then Ken, the one in her arms, laughed, a pure, bubbling sound, as if he had no idea of the crisis unfolding in her chest. It melted her. She smiled through tears, crouched beside the stall, and held him close. "As long as I have breath," she whispered, "you will never suffer alone." She bought nothing for herself that day. Ebel started taking odd jobs, washing clothes for neighbors, sweeping yards, even helping to cook at the back of a local canteen in exchange for leftover food. On some days, she walked up to 10 kilometers just to fetch clean water for the boys bathing in bottles. And still, she would return home, bathe each child with soft care, sing them lullabies from her village, and pray over them with hands trembling from fatigue, but rooted in fierce love. They grew slowly but strongly. Kelvin, the most expressive of the three, began to babble first. He called her Mama before any other word. The first time she heard it, she sat on the floor and wept until her head ached. Elijah was strong, crawling faster than the others, curious about everything. He often tried to touch the blue flames from the kerosene stove, prompting Ebel to carry him on her back even while cooking. Ken, the smallest, was soft and observant, always staring into her face like he was memorizing it. Sometimes he would wake in the middle of the night and reach for her face in the dark, giggling when he found it. She began to know their personalities as distinctly as the lines on her palms. Years passed in the blink of a sleepless eye. Their birthdays were never grand. No cakes, no balloons, but they were always filled with dancing, singing, and bowls of rice shared with smiling neighbors who had long stopped whispering. The same people who once judged her began to lend old clothes, help carry water, offer food. One woman donated school uniforms from her cousin's children. A retired teacher offered after-school lessons for free. It was as if the boys brought not just joy to her, but favor. One evening, when the boys were about 7, they gathered around Ebel while she fixed their dinner of yam porridge. The light from the kerosene lamp made her skin glow like warm bronze. Kelvin, sharp and always asking questions, looked at her suddenly and said, "Mama, why don't we look like you?" Ebel froze. The wooden spoon in her hand stopped mid-stir. The question sat between them like a ticking clock. She forced a gentle smile. "Because God makes everyone look different. You look like yourselves. That's what matters." The boys didn't ask again. Not that night. Not for many years. Perhaps her love had erased the space where doubt usually lived. In truth, they didn't need the answer. Their hearts already knew the truth. She was their mother. No matter what. The son had long since become a familiar god in their lives. Unforgiving, constant, and golden. And under its daily rise, the boys grew like yam vines in rainy season. Wild, determined, and full of life. Years rolled forward. The rickety one-room home that once echoed with infant cries now buzzed with adolescent energy. Mama Ebel no longer had to carry them on her back, but she still carried their burdens in every creak of her knees and every prayer whispered under her breath at dawn. Kelvin was the first to discover books. It began with torn pages of an old science magazine someone used to wrap Accra. He had been unwrapping the food with his brothers, giggling, when his eyes caught a diagram of the solar system. While Ken and Elijah argued over who got the bigger piece of Accra, Kelvin stared at the planets, perfect circles orbiting the sun, and felt something unlock inside him. After that, He started collecting scraps. Magazines. Newspapers. Old school notes others had thrown away. He asked questions. Too many. Why is the moon bright? Why do wires spark? Why is our house always hot? Mama Ebel didn't always know the answers, but she listened. She always listened. Ken, on the other hand, grew gentle and thoughtful. He liked to sit with Mama Ebel when she was tired, massaging her feet or helping grind pepper with the stone bowl. He noticed everything, when she coughed too long, when she ate too little, when her voice was a little sad even behind a smile. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were like calm water, soft, deep, and healing. And then there was Elijah, the most physically active. If a table needed fixing, he found nails and wood. If a wall had cracks, he found cement. When a neighbor's window broke, he offered to help, even though he barely knew how. His hands were always busy. His dreams even busier. "I want to build houses for everyone, Mama," he once declared, rubbing dust off his knees. "Big ones, with lights and fans and space for dancing." Mama Ebel smiled. "Then start with this one, so I can finally sleep without this heat roasting me like plantain." Elijah grinned and promised. He would build her a palace someday, he swore. And Mama Ebel believed him, not because he had money or plans, but because she had seen the fire in his heart. School was not easy. There were times they had to share textbooks or copy entire notes by hand because they couldn't afford photocopies. Sometimes the teacher sent them home for unpaid fees, and Ebel would run to the church or plead with a local trader for help. But never once did the boys complain. They wore torn uniforms with pride. They cleaned their sandals every night. They sat at the front of the class, their hands always raised, their names called during prize givings. Teachers spoke of them as miracles. They were brilliant, respectful, and fiercely driven. Their bond with each other was ironclad. They defended one another on the playground, shared every meal down to the last spoon, and studied together under candlelight, taking turns fanning Mama Ebel when the heat grew unbearable. They rarely fought, and when they did, it ended with laughter or storytelling. Always Mama Ebel's bedtime stories about gods, clever tortoises, or the sacredness of names. And still, Ebel worked. She never let them see how tired she was. She never let them see her skip meals. Sometimes, after the boys had gone to sleep, she would sit on the floor, staring at her hands, dark, cracked, shaking, and ask God for strength. "Let me live long enough to see who they become," she would whisper. When Kelvin built his first radio from discarded wires and parts of an old iron, she danced around the room. When Ken wrote an essay that was published in a national paper, she bought 5 copies and showed them to everyone in the market. When Elijah helped fix their leaking roof with wood from a broken fence, she cried, not from the work, but from the love. One Sunday, when the boys were in their late teens, she gathered them around after church, under the shade of the mango tree beside their compound. The air was soft with the scent of dry leaves. Ebel looked older now, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes lined from years of smiles and survival. "My sons," she said, holding each of their hands, "you may not have my blood, but you have my soul. I want you to know something very simple. I'm proud of you. And if I died tomorrow, I'd still be the happiest woman that ever lived." They didn't understand why she said it that day. But something about her voice made them hold her longer that night when they returned home. They never asked who their father was. They never asked who their mother might be. Because they knew. They already had her. And that was enough. The 30 candles flickered on the cake like tiny stars, witnesses to a journey that no one in the small compound truly understood. The celebration was modest, held in the backyard of the same house where the triplets had grown from wailing infants into men. Now the space was fuller, livelier. Plastic chairs ringed the dusty ground. A borrowed canopy flapped lazily in the evening breeze, and high-life music flowed from a Bluetooth speaker propped on a stool. Neighbors came bearing gifts, food flasks, crates of drinks, new wrappers for Mama Ebel. Everyone wanted to honor the boys, as they were affectionately called. Kelvin now wore button-down shirts and spoke like someone who walked the corridors of power. Ken had a laptop in his car at all times, constantly tapping away at something too technical to explain. And Elijah, solid and confident, had just opened his third property site and came wearing boots and a prestigbata in one of the boldest fashion statements anyone had ever seen in that neighborhood. Mama Ebel sat in the corner beneath the mango tree, wearing her finest iro and gelly, her feet cushioned on a plastic stool. Her face glowed with pride. Wrinkles had deepened over the years, but they only made her smile more pronounced, more sacred. She watched her boys, laughing and serving food, hugging guests, posing for pictures. They hadn't just grown, they had flourished. But just beyond the laughter, in the quiet space between music and memory, truth was quietly waking. It happened that same night, after the last guests had gone, after the lights had dimmed, after Ebel had fallen asleep with a tired sigh and a satisfied smile. The three men sat outside on the veranda, sipping malt and catching up like old friends do when the world finally slows down. That's when the old woman next door, Auntie Lavina, a retired midwife with loose gums and no filter, shuffled over in her faded wrapper, drawn by curiosity and the leftover cake she was sure they hadn't eaten. She sat with them for a few minutes, cracking jokes about how time had flown, about how they used to wear no underwear and now owned SUVs. Then, in the way old women tend to slip between the sacred and the profane without warning, she said, "You guys know that your mother picked you all from a refused site, right?" The air shifted. Silence fell so quickly it felt like someone had cut the power. Elijah stopped mid-laugh. Ken froze with his drink halfway to his lips. Kelvin blinked as if the words hadn't landed properly. "Sorry," Kelvin asked, gently but firmly. Auntie Lavina chuckled, not realizing the stone she had thrown into still water. "Ah, she never told you all? I was there that early morning. She came back with a basket, carrying 3 of you, who were crying like a wet cat. People said that she should report to the police, but she refused. She said that God had given her children." Her voice trailed off when she saw their faces. How every smile had vanished, how the night had suddenly become too quiet. She stood awkwardly. "Ah, do not be angry. Maybe she will tell you all later." And then she shuffled off, muttering to herself. The triplets sat in stunned silence. Elijah was the first to speak, his voice low, almost reverent. "She found us?" Ken's brow furrowed. "At a dump site?" Kelvin's lips tightened. His mind was already moving a mile a minute. He had always wondered about the missing pieces, the absent family photos, the curious glances from elders, the way Mama Ebel never answered questions about their infancy. But he had never imagined this. None of them had. The weight of it all settled slowly. How different their lives could have been. How close they came to death. How a single decision by a poor, childless woman had rewritten their destinies. "She saved us," Ken said quietly, voice cracking under the emotion. "And never said a word. Not once." Elijah swallowed hard. "She raised us like we were kings, and hid her pain like a secret." Kelvin exhaled. "She could have told us. But maybe she didn't want us to feel less." They sat in silence for a while longer, the kind of silence that doesn't beg to be broken. Then Kelvin stood, eyes gleaming. "We can't let her ever feel forgotten," he said. "We owe her more than just love." Ken nodded. "We'll do more than say thank you." Elijah looked at his brothers, his jaw set. "We'll give her the kind of life she never dared to dream." That week, without her knowing, the triplets pooled resources and began preparations. Kelvin arranged the legal paperwork. Ken designed the blueprint for a beautiful bungalow with all the modern amenities: solar power, security systems, high ceilings, her favorite color on the walls. Elijah contracted his best workers and oversaw construction with military precision. They bought her a car, a small Toyota, nothing flashy, but brand new and easy to drive. They hired someone to cook and clean for her. They chose a street near a hospital, just in case she ever needed quick care. They kept it secret for a month. Then, on a sunny Saturday, they told her they were going to a client's party. They blindfolded her. They put her in the car, and when they arrived, they walked her to the gate of the house she'd never seen before. "Open your eyes, Mama," Kelvin said. She did. And she gasped. Before her stood a dream wrapped in cement, paint, and love. Her name engraved in the stone above the entryway. Mama Ebel's house. For a long moment, she couldn't move. Her hands shook. Her lips parted, but no words came. Then slowly she turned to them. What is all this? Elijah held her hand. Your palace, Mama. You said we'd build it one day. Ken opened the door. There's running water in every room. Solar light. Gas cooker. Kelvin pointed to the driveway. And the car's yours. No more trekking. And then, as if all the years of suffering and sacrifice had waited for this one moment to release themselves, she fell to her knees and wept. Not quiet tears. Not graceful ones. But raw, loud, uncontrollable sobs from a heart that had carried too much for too long. The triplets knelt with her, arms wrapped around her, tears of their own sliding down their cheeks. And though they never spoke of what Auntie Lavina had said, they all knew the truth now. She wasn't their mother by blood. She was their mother by heart, by sacrifice, and by grace. And that was a bond no biology could ever break. The scent of lavender filled the rooms of the new house. Not the artificial kind that came from cheap air fresheners, but real lavender, planted in the small garden near the front porch, just beneath the window of Mama Ebel's bedroom. Ken had remembered she once mentioned loving the smell when she walked past the church altar as a girl. So he'd imported it, had it planted with care. Now, every morning when she opened her window, the scent greeted her gently, like a memory returned from the past. Life had changed, but not in a way that made her forget. Instead, it had given meaning to every sacrifice. The new home was bright, airy, painted in cream and warm earth tones. The ceiling fans didn't hum and wobble anymore. They spun smoothly. There was a flat-screen TV in the sitting room. Not that she watched much. She preferred the veranda, where she could sit with a cup of tea, slippers on, wrapper tied, and eyes full of peace. She had help now, Mary, a young lady hired to cook, clean, and keep her company. But Ebel remained herself. She insisted on sweeping her own bedroom. She still picked her vegetables with care. She still wore her old headscarves, tied the same way she had done 20 years ago. Money had elevated her life, but it had not changed her soul. Her triplets, the ones who once cried at dawn in a basket, had become giants in the world. Dr. Kelvin Ebel now walked the halls of teaching hospitals, saving lives, training interns, sending his mama daily health reminders like drink water and check your blood pressure. He had recently published a journal on maternal care in underserved communities and named it the Ebel Model. Ken, the quiet dreamer, was now CEO of a fast-growing African tech startup that had won global innovation awards. He built systems to digitize rural healthcare and remote learning. His company was now valued in the millions. And still, he called every night just to hear her voice say, "Sleep well, my son." Elijah, the builder of things, now owned multiple properties in 3 cities. He had trained and employed young men from the same slum where he grew up, including 2 of the sons of the very neighbors who once mocked Ebel for adopting abandoned children. He came home weekly to check on her plumbing, fix anything that looked out of place, even when she said everything was fine. The boys had once called her Mama. Now, the world called her Mama of Kings. But even amidst all the blessings, the question still lingered. Would they ever ask her? Would they sit her down one day, look into her eyes and say, "Tell us the truth. Who left us? Why didn't you ever say anything?" She feared that day. Not because she had lied, but because she didn't want them to carry the wound of their beginning. She didn't want them to feel abandoned again. But that day never came. Instead, something else happened. One evening, as the sun cast long orange ribbons across the sky, the boys surprised her with a small family dinner. No cameras, no guests, just them. A cake sat on the table, surrounded by soft laughter and the aroma of yam porridge. Then Kelvin stood, lifting a glass of fruit wine. "Mama," he said. "We know." The words didn't need explaining. Her hand tightened around her cup. Her heart fluttered. "But we don't care," Ken added. "Because love raised us. Not blood." Elijah stepped forward and placed a small, gold-laced envelope in her hands. "This is for you. A little gift. Just because. With trembling fingers, she opened it. It was a deed to a plot of land in the village where she was born. Prime land. Fenced. Titled. Paid for. It was hers. And there's more, Kelvin said with a smile. A foundation. In your name. For abandoned children. Her hand covered her mouth. She tried to speak but couldn't. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. Again, they never asked for her to explain. Never interrogated the past. They simply decided to honor her for what mattered most. The woman who gave them everything, without ever having anything to start with. And so they lived on. Together. Week after week, the boys visited. Sometimes they came all at once, sometimes separately, each time with gifts and hugs and silly jokes. The house never felt empty. It echoed with love, laughter, and the quiet gratitude that needed no words. When neighbors asked her why her sons never searched for their real mother, Ebel would smile gently and say, because they already found her. And when she walked through her home at night, turning off the lights, checking doors, humming her favorite hymns, she no longer worried about what would have happened had she chosen differently all those years ago. Because in the deepest part of her soul, she knew. The greatest thing she had ever done in this world was not finding the boys. It was loving them. And they had returned that love, tripled, matured, and eternal. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.